Good evening. Welcome to this special edition of Security Focus. I'm Clermont Featherstone. Do stay tuned. I'm happy to be with the viewing public once over, and I think before we go into our regular programming, it is only fitting that I say to you what I've been doing over the last 2 years that I've been absent from the program. And I think it is only fair to my viewers that I share this with you because so many of you out there are playing with the same things that has kept me off the program for 2 years without even knowing. So this is what occurred. Back in 2018, when I was doing Security Focus, standing right here, I felt in November of 2018 a slight shivering in my body and felt it was just a matter of tiredness. And I decided that I will hasten to conclude the 16 or 20 episodes of Security Focus, which took about 4 or 5 months. And so those of you who were keeping pace with that program would notice that the 14th episode was around November month end. And as we progress to the 16th episode, around the 18th of December, I was just burnt out, dog tired. And so I decided that I would take a rest. Coming out of that, the following year, early in the following year, while exercising, I found that I went to the Hermanston Lodge and I found that while there, I felt good, but I felt that I was kind of perspiring a little too much for me. I've never been a person who perspired much. And so I felt that morning that it was a little excessive. But I continued with my exercise and I did what I had to do. And eventually I discovered when I had concluded my business at the Hermanston Lodge, when I came out to continue the exercise routine, I could not properly recognize what was at the east of me. And so we were a corner or so from Blessingen Road. I could recognize north, south, west, but I was not recognizing what was to the east of me. And it looked like two places, one in Belmont, Trinidad, one in Jamaica. And I felt that that was somewhat strange. And so I walked to Vlissingen Road and he says, well, look, it's Vlissingen Road, all right. And so I went back down Crowell Street, straight to the Demerara Bank, and I did my business. But just before I got across the street, I discovered that it was difficult for me to determine the pace at which vehicles were descending upon me. And so it was extremely difficult to calculate the speed of vehicles so that I avoid being struck. And that caused me to think somewhat. Eventually that evening, I spoke with friends and colleagues, and they said that that's a transient ischemic attack. So what you're looking at as of now is a minor stroke, and you need to do with it. I dealt with it, went to the emergency room, and much did not come out of it. They did not believe that I was under real threat. I got some medication a couple of days after. And 1 month after that, another attack came. I could not determine whether it was mild or otherwise, but I knew that given the first episode and the second episode, I felt sick. I was never ill. I continued doing things, but with great effort. And so I want to implore upon you to take some time out to care for yourself, to observe what is going on in your life, especially changes in your life, not to take things for granted, and to try to get to the bottom of any slight change. When I had this attack, there were some symptoms that I ignored. One being a symptom that mimicked something that I have gotten over and over in life, neuralgia. And I thought this was a neuralgia pain because I have suffered from that, from exercising early in the mornings and so sometimes late at night. And so I had that in and out for a couple of years. And I felt that the symptoms that I was experiencing, pain in the face and so, had to do with neuralgia, took something for it, and I felt it would go away. It did not go away. I was lucky not to be stricken or not to be rendered or incapacitated, and I thank God for that. And I hope that you will learn from this experience and be able to take better care of yourself. Welcome back. You know, I wanted to do this special edition for a couple of reasons, and foremost among them has to do with what I believe is the rising of or increase of racism and prejudice in our beloved country. I will present 3 brief examples. There was an incident, for example, in the border market some time back, which came to my attention. And it had to do with 2 families, one an Indo-Guyanese, one an Afro-Guyanese family. And they were both doing business in the same space. And something went wrong. And the police, the city police, became involved in that incident. Suffice to say that the Indo-Guyanese family felt aggrieved that sufficient was not being done to protect them and to make them feel secure enough to want to continue business. But that is not the point. This is the point. While they were aggrieved that sufficient was not being done by the relevant or competent authority, they were mortally afraid to go further, whether to report the matter or incident to the regular police, the Guyana Police Force, or to, and one of them did say, well, we could go to Freedom House and report the matter. And another say, I don't think that is so good, because if we did that, they might very well write the authorities, write the council, write somebody to bring the matter to their attention, and we would have to go through persecution all over. Now, I have a fundamental worry with that particular episode. I'll tell you why. If they voted for a government and their government is in power and they felt persecuted to the point that they are afraid to report to the authorities or even the representatives of their government, that speak to a very troubling situation. That is the first point I wanted to make. There is another point that I want to touch on, and this has to do with pejorative terms. You know, from time to time, people of different races and ethnic groups in Guyana have been given or been addressed in a pejorative way. And many of us have accepted it to the extent that we now use those terms freely, even to refer to ourselves or to refer to people of other races. And you know what I'm talking about. A couple of months ago, there was an incident that took place on Barrack Street. And it had to do with a business being run by a colored gentleman, which opened opposite to a business or an office run by an African gentleman. Apparently, the colored fellow has never seen the African fellow going into the premises or negotiating or what have you. So while this building is being renovated and the African fellow, the Afro-Guyanese, is talking to his carpenters and walking off from the building to view how the work is being done and, to relate to them, the colored fellow looks at him and says, are you from around here? And the fellow is astounded and he says, well, why do you ask? And he said, are you getting through? And he's ignored. And he says, are you waiting on someone? This is in the Kingston area, mind you. 10 o'clock in the morning. And the fellow said, why are you questioning me, may I ask, in the same tone? And he says, well, ever since I came driving from the opposite side, I saw you walking up and down and you were just looking into people's place. You just kept looking into that place. And the man said to him, is that all that you've recognized? And he says, yes, you kept looking into people's place all the time and so. And so the man said, if you were approaching me from that side and you're taking some time to pay some attention to exactly what I was doing, you would have noticed that what I'm actually doing is making contact with my painters and carpenters on that roof there. But because there is so much prejudice in your heart and you are not prepared to take time out to properly analyze what is happening before you, hence the manner in which you've accosted me. And he said, well, I ain't really got to take no time for do not, if I see you and you look like this or that to me, I just act on that. And I believe that is also a very troubling development in our country. There is a final case study, and this has to do with a rental situation. Here you have an Indo-Guyanese family who is renting a building to an Afro-Guyanese tenant, a tenant of Amerindian descent, and in the mix is an Indo-Guyanese rent collector who happens to be an attorney. The tenant of Afro-Guyanese descent is domiciled at the bottom. The tenant of Amerindian descent lives at the top. There was a gentleman who inhabited a garage, a Cuban gentleman, and it occurred that that Cuban gentleman was given an agreement so that he had something that tied him to this garage where he was residing at the time. And so he could get internet, he could get things to purchase, and so forth from courts and the other places. And it was possible under these circumstances for the Cuban to go to courts or anywhere else. It was also possible for the gentleman of Amerindian descent to do business because he had a contract. When it came time for the African person to receive a contract, the Indo-Guyanese family, two brothers, meandered their way out of presenting a contract and escaped abroad. Mind you, this property, particularly the bottom, could not be inhabited unless certain things were done to it. And this was known because the property had a number of tenants or potential tenants visit to view what was on offer, and about 15 left. So that tells us something. From there on, there was a number of altercations at the location between the tenant at the top, the tenant at the bottom tenant reporting the matter to the attorney, reporting the matter to the landlords, nothing being done. Tenant at the top aggressing the tenant at the bottom, locking gates, blocking garages, leaving on pipes, to the extent that an improperly connected pump leaked into the tenant's downstairs home for 18 months and caused severe destruction, to the extent that when the tenant downstairs reported the matter to the landlord cursed the tenant out and said, okay, vacate my residence. And if you don't vacate, I am going to send people to ensure that you do so. I'm going to send bad men, serious men, and you know what I'm talking about because I subjected the tenant upstairs to that sort of treatment before. So this is what I'm saying. We in Guyana have to prevail in our government to make proper changes to the Landlord and Tenants Act for a number of pertinent reasons. I'll provide about 4 of them. We have in our country today many Cubans, many Latinos, people from African countries, European countries, Caribbean societies coming to work in our country. And they have certain expectations. And we cannot leave the archaic document to govern these new relationships. As an example, if you have a 4-apartment building at Industry owned by a 58 or 65-year-old Indo-Guyanese who made his money working in the sugar estate as a fitter machinist, how much do we expect such a guy to know about Barbadians, Nigerians, Venezuelans, Cubans? How much do we expect him to know? How much do you expect him to know about the behaviors and the cultural nuances of urban blacks who might have lived in the middle class? These things are not going to come easy to our people, and we cannot leave landlords and tenants to work out the modality of their relationships. We cannot do that in this new dispensation. I have noted in Trinidad, for example, If a house goes on the market in Trinidad and the rent is anything over like 1,500 TT, 1,000 TT, 1,200 TT, that property has to be subject to an assessment. And so I believe a way around all of these difficulties is to have, say, the Ministry of Housing, the Ministry of Health, and the Ministry of Works collaborate on approving all properties for whether business or residential use. And my reason for saying this is because many people subdivide houses in a very unhealthy way, and the Ministry of Health would pick those up immediately. There may very well be structural problems, as in the case of the house, the building that I'm talking about. After the tenant would have gotten in, while the tenant has agreed to assist with the remodeling of this building to a certain extent, the tenant was not told that the building has structural problems, so that when the rain came, the tenant had to contend with 200 gallons of water in the building, flat building, in one day. And when the rains came the following year, the same thing occurred. And then the tenant could assess that there were structural problems in the building. I think we need to find a way to harness that. In that very structure, there was a problem of poor electrical installation, and the landlords did mention that they would contribute towards the elimination of that problem. So that the people upstairs had at one time 6 children, and there were a number of persons downstairs, and a fire started that went undetected. When the people at the bottom woke the following morning and could not access electricity, they brought in a contractor, and the contractor was able to diagnose that a fire started in this building the night before while they were asleep, and the breaker tripped, and they were able to be saved. So we could have had a situation on our hands where a building is gutted, a number of children at the top, people are injured or killed, and a number of persons, including senior citizens, at the bottom. I'm told that that situation has its genesis in a landlord attempting to pass his liability onto the tenant, and that happens when there is nothing in place to keep such landlords in check, and when there is nothing in place to ensure that landlords in this case do not take advantage of their tenants. But I want to speak also to landlords being advantaged by tenants, because that is another side of the coin. And then we are building multi-story buildings and multi-apartments, and we're dividing a house that had 4 apartments into 6 apartments, and we want to have people of different races and different cultures into this place, and we have no proper training program. We do not have brochures to give out to landlords. We do not hold seminars so that the landlords do not know how to accord themselves and how to solve, mediate, as it were, in these cases. And so at times, zero mission or neglect of certain key signals can lead to a murder or some other fallout of a nasty type. Remember, we had this situation with the young man who was murdered by the landlord's nephew or relative, son, whatever it was. That's a very serious situation. And what that situation will do for us is cause women to go into themselves and say, look, I don't want my son going out, or I don't want my children going out. And everybody will want to do something and have the children under them, under their wings, which will give rise to another sort of problems. So I'm saying, as a government, Mr. Nandalal, Mr. Jagdeo, the president, the other ministers who have a bearing on or any influence, Minister of Health, whether it is in that order or otherwise, I would like us to look, to review the Landlord and Tenants Act to ensure that it is more inclusive, providing proper protection to landlords, providing protection to tenants, and all who have occasion to be present within residential or commercial confines. Welcome back. I want to pitch an idea which has to do with the establishment. I recall reading in the newspaper some time back that the government was about to establish an entity of sorts to protect our borders. And it caused me to muster up some thoughts of my own. It's a good thing, because I've always said, and I've said 15 years ago, that we need a paramilitary organization, a go-between, a sort of third force to assist both the army and the police. And this is as good a time for the establishment of, say, Guyana Security and National Defense Corps, something of that sort, because such an entity could aid the police, the army, the fire service, the defense force, while having a specific mandate to function on its own as well. And so you're talking about aiding the police in rural, remote, and hinterland interdiction. You're talking about anti-terrorism intervention, talking about crisis intervention, hostage and crisis intervention, and negotiations. We're talking about a host of other things that could be mandated to such an entity, and that entity could fill the void conspicuously absent for the presence of a third force in our country. But there are two other matters I would want to touch on briefly. And one has to do with the presence of or incidence of diabetes and hypertension in our police force. Perhaps it is a problem in the joint services in general, but I know what obtains in the Guyana Police Force. So we have a situation where police officers, irrespective of race, Indian police officers, Black police officers, Amerindian police officers, colored police officers, Portuguese police officers, from the time they would have spent 10, 15 years in the Guyana Police Force, and they're somewhere like station sergeant, everybody crying out, head hurting, neck hurting, and the like. And I've looked at it. I had a very touching experience with a young police officer about 3 months ago. And so he was walking through Kingston and he is limping, and he's well dressed with the slippers on. And I says, well, what do we have here? Policeman immaculately dressed in his slippers. And he pointed, and I looked at his toes, and they looked kind of raw. And I had some thoughts of my own. But I said, what is wrong with you, my son? And he said, well, the doctor said diabetes. And I said, how old are you, may I ask? And he said, 23 years old. I've encountered policewomen, 29, 30, 35, policemen, young men, and they have complained bitterly of the stressful episodes that their work environment provide. Prosecutors especially, pressures from above, pressures left, right, and center. And so I believe we need to have some sort of support system for the police, for these police officers, and we need to try our best to see how we can bring about relief. And the paramilitary organization that I spoke of earlier can aid the joint services in the area of border control and other specialist intervention, prison riots, prison breaks, and so, and take the stress that is generally placed on members of our joint services, but especially the police. And I'll tell you why. People talk about, well, everyone needs some additional money. I said the police needs more money. The police before everybody else needs more money, increase in salary. And I'm speaking as an expert in security. Here why the police needs more money. When the police officer leaves home, he has a little ID card in his pocket. And that ID card, we know, is a piece of law, and he can present it and carry out his duty anytime, 24 hours. He can be called from a wedding, he can be called from a funeral, and there are circumstances that may provide the context for him not being allowed out of barracks to attend certain functions. So police people make certain sacrifices. You can function without nurses for a while. You could get volunteers. We did it before. You can function without teachers for a while. And in 3 weeks, 3 months, the system returns to normalcy. Well, let me share an idea with you, President Ali, Minister, Honorable Minister of Home Affairs, Honorable Attorney General. Allow for an interruption in the functions of the Guyana Police Force for 1 week, and the results will live with us for the next 25 years. Just have a disruption in the police force and everything goes haywire for 1 week. And the ensuing chaos will be with us for 25 years, a quarter of a century. You're going to have problems with theft, with victimization. Everybody who had somebody to murder will murder them. Everybody who wanted to assassinate somebody will assassinate them. All who wanted to rob a store will rob that store. Insurance will go up. Everything will go up. You will have total chaos in the land for a long time to come. And so there are certain things that other categories of professionals can do that a police officer cannot do or should not do. If a nurse, for example, is late for work, she can leave an area where there is a transportational problem and take a squeeze in a bus and go to the Georgetown Hospital or the Prasad Hospital. If a teacher lacks an iron, clothes, electric iron in her house, she could go over to the neighbor and beg the neighbor for an iron and come back and iron her clothes and go to work. Let police officers start begging favors. Let the police officer take a squeeze in a vehicle that is already overloaded. Take a squeeze to Brickdam Police Station. And then during the day, when the same driver pass back with overload, let him stop him. Let him attempt to stop the other drivers who would have brought him out of where he lives other days in the week or the month or what have you. I think the viewer is coming around to my idea that police officers in a society needs to be taken care of better than we are doing now. If we take care of police people, of police personnel, we will have a situation where the society will be a little more ordered and we will have and gain control in some other areas that we previously have lost control. I hope some degree of primacy will be given to some of my thoughts today, and I hope to be with you in ensuing programs. I must thank you, the viewer, for having invited me into your home, and do stay safe for the remainder of today and the weeks ahead. I am Claremont Featherstone, thanking you for viewing Security Focus. Good night.